The heavy humid air of a late Midwestern July hung thick over Silver Creek Estates. But the woman standing in the middle of my front yard looked entirely unaffected by the heat. When I pulled my flatbed truck into the gravel driveway, after a long morning shift, she didn't even look up. She kept her eyes fixed on the neon green measuring tape stretching out behind her, down the precise edge of my manicured lawn. A skinny teenager in an oversized polo shirt trailed behind her, like a nervous shadow, clutching a plastic clipboard against his chest. I left the engine idling for a long, quiet moment, just watching them through the dust-streaked windshield. The woman was dressed in a pristine navy blue blazer. On a Saturday afternoon, her posture was razor-sharp, the kind of stiff, unyielding stance of someone who sincerely believed she held the title deeds to the entire modern world. I killed the engine, opened the truck door, and stepped down onto the gravel. "Can I help you with something?" I asked, my voice carrying cleanly across the open space. She slowly retracted the tape measure, the metallic click echoing in the quiet afternoon. When she finally looked at me, there was no greeting, no polite neighborly smile. It was the kind of cold, calculating glance that real estate developers and corporate auditors use to size up a person in 3 seconds flat. "Deciding you aren't worth a fourth, Mr. Vance," she said. It wasn't an inquiry. It was a dynamic statement. She already knew exactly who I was. More importantly, she had already decided what she thought of me. I am Victoria Sterling, President of the Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association. We are currently conducting a formal survey of the community's common area boundary lines. It's a routine, aesthetic, and zoning assessment. She gestured with a manicured hand toward the sprawling strip of land running down the entire western boundary of my property. It was a beautiful, long stretch of land roughly 42 feet wide, shaded by a majestic row of ancient, towering white oak trees. It was the exact spot where I drank my coffee every morning. I had been out there with my John Deere tractor, mowing that grass every single week since I inherited the keys. "That's not an HOA common area," I said calmly, leaning against the side of my truck. "That land belongs to this property." The pause she gave me was pure theater. A slow, condescending smile crept onto the corner of her lips, carefully calculated to make me feel small. "Mr. Vance, this particular green space has been fully maintained, mowed, and managed by the Silver Creek HOA for well over 25 years, Victoria replied, her tone dripping with bureaucratic patience. "It is explicitly designated as community-owned, green space within our legally binding governing covenants. It belongs to the association." "I don't particularly care what your internal documents say, Mrs. Sterling," I replied, crossing my arms. "The land is mine." The pristine smile flickered, just for a fraction of a second, before hardening into stone. She stepped closer to the driveway, her movements perfectly measured and controlled. "You are quite new to this development, Mr. Vance. We have deeply established legal systems and neighborhood standards in place here. I would truly hate for your transition into our community to become deeply unpleasant." I looked down at the bright orange marking, flags the teenager was placing in the dirt, then at the clipboard, and finally back at Victoria Sterling in her midsummer business blazer. "You and your assistant are currently trespassing on private property," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "I need you to pick up your tape and leave my land immediately." She tucked her digital tablet firmly under her arm, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. "Our legal counsel will be in touch shortly," she said sharply. She turned on her heel and marched down the driveway, the teenager scrambling to keep up. She walked away with the absolute certainty of a person who had never been told no in her entire life. She truly believed she had already won this battle. What Victoria Sterling didn't know was exactly what lay buried in the county archives, stamped into the ironclad wording of my family's original property deed. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. My name is Thomas Vance. I am 63 years old, and before I retired, I spent 31 years working as a senior land surveyor for the county GIS and highway department. Over those 3 decades, I had analyzed, mapped, and verified more property lines, complex meets and bounds descriptions, and historical deed records than the vast majority of high-priced real estate attorneys encounter in an entire lifetime. I knew how the land talked, and more importantly, I knew how to read the stories it left behind in the ink. I had moved into this specific house in Silver Creek Estates just 4 months prior, following the passing of my maternal uncle, Arthur Vance. Arthur had passed away at 87 years old. He was a quiet, deeply private bachelor who never married and had no children of his own. He had lived in this custom-built ranch home since 1971. That date is critical. 1971. Arthur built his home on a large independent parcel of rural land, long before this sprawling, uniform, suburban subdivision ever existed. He was there before the first bulldozer cleared the forest, before any restrictive HOA covenants were drafted, and certainly long before Victoria Sterling was even old enough to hold a clipboard. When he passed, he left the house, the memories, and every single square inch of the land to me. Uncle Arthur had been a gentle soul. He was the type of man who hated conflict of any kind. If the neighborhood association sent him a ridiculous fine for his grass being a half-inch too tall, he would simply sigh, open his checkbook, and pay it just to avoid a fight. He wanted peace in his final years. But Arthur had never not once signed his name to a contract, surrendering his land. When the corporate developers arrived in 1987 to build Silver Creek Estates, they were forced to plat their cookie-cutter subdivision directly around Arthur's existing, legally recorded parcel. Arthur's original 1971 deed explicitly included a secondary, long strip of land, 42 feet wide along the entire western border, mapped out in precise, undeniable geometric surveying coordinates. The developer's 1987 master plat map had simply labeled that 42-foot strip as HO, a common area, green space, likely hoping the quiet old man wouldn't notice or care. But a label on a developer's colorful marketing map is completely meaningless without a corresponding deed transfer of title behind it. There was no quitclaim deed, no legal conveyance, and absolutely no signature from Arthur Vance. The HOA had been paying a commercial landscaping company to mow grass they didn't legally own for nearly 4 decades. And now, by law, that land belonged entirely to me. On Tuesday morning, the mail carrier dropped a thick, white envelope into my box. I wasn't surprised. People like Victoria Sterling don't just walk away from a disagreement. They retreat to their offices, gather their paperwork, and return with a legal vengeance. The envelope bore the official embossed gold crest of the Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association. It looked deliberately intimidating, designed to mimic a formal legal summons. I sat down at my kitchen table, poured a cup of black coffee, and slid a letter opener through the paper. Inside were 3 separate escalating violation notices, all backdated to the exact Saturday morning Victoria had trespassed on my lawn. Violation 1. Unauthorized landscaping modification. It claimed that the 2 classic red rose bushes I had carefully planted along my front brick walkway were a direct violation of the HOA's strict botanical guidelines. The community rules apparently dictated that only white or soft yellow flowering perennials were permitted in front-facing beds to maintain a harmonious community aesthetic. Violation 2. Vehicle parking infraction. My pickup truck had allegedly been parked in my own driveway at a slight angle that created a visual obstruction inconsistent with neighborhood sightline standards. Violation 3. Severe encroachment on association common area. The notice officially stated that I had been observed making unauthorized, illegal use of designated community green space on the western boundary of Lot 47. It warned that continued failure to clear my personal belongings from the area would result in escalating fines starting at $250 per week, leading to a property lien. I read the third violation notice over and over again, a slow grin spreading across my face. Victoria had committed her biggest blunder right out of the gate. She had put her illegal claims and extortion tactics in writing, officially signed and dated. If you were in Tom's shoes, looking at these multi-$100 fines for simply putting flowers on your own inherited property, how would you react? Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. That afternoon, I called Martha Higgins. Martha was a lifelong resident of the area and had lived in the house directly across the lane from Uncle Arthur for nearly 40 years. She knew the DNA of this neighborhood better than anyone alive. They already sent you the golden letters, didn't they? Martha said the moment she answered, her voice laced with a mixture of amusement and exhaustion. 3 of them, actually, I replied, leaning back in my chair, including a hefty weekly fine for using my own backyard. Martha let out a heavy, cynical sigh. Arthur used to get those envelopes almost every single month for the last 6 or 7 years of his life. Tom, sometimes 2 a month if Victoria was on a tear about something. He just paid them. He told me it wasn't worth the emotional toll of fighting a multi-million-dollar corporate association. He just wanted to be left alone. Did he ever talk to you about that western strip with the old oak trees? I asked, my pen hovering over a legal pad. There was a long pause on the line. He brought it up once, maybe back in the late 90s, Martha recalled thoughtfully. He said, the HOA maintenance crews had started mowing it back then, and he just let them do it because he was getting too old to manage that far end of the property anyway. He figured, as long as they left him in peace on his porch, they could have the grass. But they didn't leave him alone, did they? No, Martha, I said quietly, looking out at the sun-dappled lawn. They didn't. After we hung up, a profound sense of quiet anger began to settle deep in my chest. I thought about my uncle. A proud, gentle man who had worked hard his entire life, trapped in his own home, writing checks to a gang of neighborhood bullies because the alternative felt too overwhelming. I understood why he did it, but I wasn't built like Arthur. I had spent 30 years dealing with stubborn county bureaucrats and crooked land developers. I knew exactly how to fight back. I didn't reply to Victoria's letters. In my line of work, I had learned that the worst possible mistake you can make when dealing with an aggressive adversary is to react instantly. An immediate, emotional reaction tells your opponent exactly where your boundaries are. It shows them what scares you, what keeps you awake at night, and what you are willing to surrender. I chose to give Victoria absolute silence while I went to work. The following Wednesday morning, I drove down to the County Recorder of Deeds office. The building was a classic, heavy limestone structure in the heart of downtown. I walked past the security checkpoint and made my way to the property archives room. The clerk working the desk was a sharp young woman named Eleanor, who possessed the rare, quiet efficiency of someone who genuinely took pride in historical preservation. I need to pull a complete historical chain of title and all recorded maps for Parcel 14B, originally recorded in 1971. I told her, handing over a slip of paper. I also need the complete 1987 subdivision master plat for Silver Creek Estates, along with all recorded amendments from 1993, 1999, and 2005. Eleanor nodded, pulled up her terminal, and, within 20 minutes, she had retrieved several thick, leather-bound archive books and a series of large rolled architectural blueprints. I spent the next 4 hours at a long wooden research table, meticulously analyzing the documents with a professional magnifying glass and a yellow highlighter. What I uncovered was a goldmine of institutional arrogance. The 1987 developer's plat map clearly showed the 42-foot western strip, shaded in green, and labeled as HOA property. However, as I flipped through the accompanying legal transfer books, there was an absolute void. There was no deed of dedication, no easement grant, and absolutely no signature from Arthur Vance. The developer had simply drawn a line on a map, labeled it as their own, and walked away. But then I found something else. Something that made me sit back in my hard wooden chair and stare up at the fluorescent lights in utter disbelief. According to the county tax assessor records, since 1987, the HOA had mistakenly integrated that specific western strip into their overall common area tax portfolio. For 39 years, the association had been blindly paying property taxes on a piece of land they had absolutely no legal right to own. This wasn't just a minor administrative oversight. It was a massive legal liability for them. That evening, I reached out to my nephew Nathan. Nathan was a sharp 38-year-old commercial real estate broker in the city, who understood the tactical mechanics of property litigation. "Uncle Tom," Nathan said, his tone a mix of concern and curiosity. "What kind of hornet's nest have you stepped into out there?" "I haven't stepped into anything yet," I said, looking over the stack of certified copies on my kitchen table. "But I need the name of a truly ironclad property litigation attorney. Someone who specializes in quiet title actions, adverse possession defense, and deed disputes. Someone who doesn't blink." "I know exactly who you need," Nathan said, without a second of hesitation. "Her name is Amanda Ross. She handles complex commercial boundary disputes. She is incredibly methodical, completely precise, and absolutely ruthless when a case goes to a courtroom." By Thursday morning, I had an appointment booked with Amanda Ross for the following Monday. But Victoria Sterling wasn't planning on waiting for the wheels of justice to turn. On Saturday morning, exactly 1 week after our initial confrontation, the loud, rhythmic reverse beep of a commercial truck woke me up at 7 o'clock. I threw on a flannel shirt and walked to the kitchen window. Down on the western strip, a heavy-duty pickup truck bearing the official logo of a local commercial fencing company was parked in the grass. 2 men in bright neon work shirts were busy unloading bundles of heavy 6-foot wooden privacy fence panels, a gas-powered post hole digger, and bundles of orange surveyor flags. They were preparing to erect a permanent barrier right down the middle of my land. I walked out the back door slowly, my hands slid into my pockets, completely calm. "Morning, fellas," I called out. The older of the 2 installers, a weathered man with a calloused face, stopped unchaining the equipment. "Morning, sir. We're here on behalf of the Silver Creek HOA. Miss Sterling authorized an emergency boundary fence installation along this entire common green space perimeter today." "I appreciate you guys are just doing a job," I said, keeping my voice steady and polite. "But I'm going to need you to turn that machine off and stop digging immediately. This specific parcel of land is currently under a formal legal deed dispute. If you sink those posts into the ground today, the association is going to face a massive property damage lawsuit, and your company might find itself caught right in the middle of it." The older worker wiped his brow, looking incredibly uneasy. He wasn't a corporate bully. He was just a guy trying to earn a living on a Saturday. "Sir, we have a signed work order from the board president herself, stating the HOA has full legal authority here." "I understand what she told you," I replied gently. "But she doesn't own this dirt. Go ahead and place a call to Mrs. Sterling. Let her know the owner is standing right here with the original 1971 deed. I'll wait right here." The worker nodded, stepped away toward his truck, and dialed his phone. I stood in the cool morning air, listening to the birds chirping in the old oak trees that Victoria wanted so desperately to steal from my family. 3 minutes later, the worker walked back over, his face flushed with embarrassment. "She told us to keep digging, sir," the installer said, avoiding eye contact. "She said you're a tenant who doesn't know the bylaws, and that if we leave the site, our contract will be terminated immediately." I nodded slowly, showing absolutely no anger. "All right. I'm not upset with you guys. You're just following orders. But I want to let you know that I am going to document every single thing that happens on this property today. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket, hit record, and began filming everything in high definition. Their faces, the company truck's license plate, the specific locations of the stakes, and the deep holes they were beginning to tear into my grass. Imagine watching strangers dig post holes on the land your family owned for half a century. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in the story, and share your thoughts in the comments. Amanda. Ross's office was located on the top floor of a sleek glass tower downtown. When I walked in on Monday morning, she didn't look like the stereotypical bombastic trial lawyers you see on television. She was a poised, soft-spoken woman who wore elegant reading glasses on a silver chain around her neck. She possessed a deep, powerful stillness, the unmistakable presence of a professional who had heard every single lie a developer could tell and knew exactly how to dismantle them. She listened to my narrative for 40 minutes without interrupting a single time. She examined my uncle's original 1971 deed, the 1987 subdivision plat map, the 3 violation notices, and the high-definition video of the fence crew digging into my lawn. She held the certified 1971 deed up to the sunlight for a moment, examining the historical county stamp as if it were a priceless piece of artwork. When she finally set the documents down, she folded her hands neatly on her mahogany desk, looked directly at me. "Mr. Vance," Amanda said, a dangerous spark in her eyes, "do you fully realize what you have handed me here?" "I believe I have a solid case that the land was never legally transferred to the HOA," I replied. "You have significantly more than that," Amanda said, tapping the folder firmly. "You have nearly 40 years of a homeowners association, exercising unlawful, unauthorized corporate control over private land they never legally acquired. You have a developer's plat map used as an illegal substitute for a formal title conveyance. You have documented civil trespass, and, most importantly, you have a permanent fence installation conducted after explicit verbal and written notice of a title dispute. In the eyes of a judge, that is a willful, bad faith encroachment. What about the association's potential claim to adverse possession?" I asked, playing devil's advocate. "They've been openly mowing and maintaining that grass for decades." Amanda actually laughed a quick, sharp sound. "Adverse possession is an incredibly high legal bar, Tom. It requires the possession to be open, notorious, exclusive, continuous, and crucially, hostile. According to your neighbor Martha, your Uncle Arthur knew they were mowing it, and informally permitted it because he was too elderly to care. In property law, informal permission instantly destroys the element of hostility. You cannot claim adverse possession over land you were allowed to use. Permission is the ultimate kryptonite to an adverse possession claim." She took off her reading glasses and leaned forward. "Our first move is a legal sledgehammer. We are going to send a comprehensive, certified legal demand letter directly to every single member of the HOA Board of Directors, the Registered Corporate Counsel, and the County Recorder's Office. We will attach your 1971 deed, our independent title analysis, and a formal demand to halt all operations and remove that fence within 7 business days. If they refuse, we file an immediate quiet title action and seek an emergency court injunction." The certified letters were dispatched on Wednesday afternoon via courier. I knew the exact second Victoria Sterling received the package because Martha called my cell phone at precisely 11:45 on Thursday morning. "Tom, you should see the street right now," Martha whispered excitedly into the phone. "There are 3 luxury vehicles parked haphazardly outside the HOA community office. Victoria has been locked inside that room since 9 o'clock this morning with 2 men in expensive suits. They look absolutely panicked. They had called in their high-priced corporate attorneys." Good. That meant their legal team had actually read Amanda Ross's brief, looked at the historical deeds, and delivered the grim news to Victoria that she was standing on quicksand. The HOA's formal response arrived 6 days later. Their attorney tried to put up a brave front. They argued that the 1987 plat map constituted an implied statutory dedication of the land for community use, and that Arthur's long-term silence amounted to legal acquiescence. "It's a textbook desperation play," Amanda told me over the phone. "Statutory dedication requires an explicit, signed public document or a formal legislative act of acceptance by a municipal government body. A private suburban HOA is not a government entity." Their argument is completely hollow, and their lawyer knows it. They are simply hoping you get intimidated by the legal jargon and agree to a cheap settlement. I looked out my kitchen window. The 6-foot wooden privacy fence was now fully completed, cutting off my view of the beautiful oak trees completely. It was an ugly, arrogant scar across my family's history. "We don't settle," I told Amanda. "File the lawsuit." The following Friday evening, I walked across the street to Martha's house. She had invited me over for tea, but when I arrived, she had an old, battered cardboard shoebox wrapped in thick rubber bands sitting on her kitchen counter. Arthur used to bring these over to me every single time he found one pinned to his door or sitting in his mailbox. Martha said softly, sliding the box toward me. He would shake his head, completely stressed out, and say he didn't know how to fight these people. I told him to keep them. After he passed away, I found this box tucked into his closet while I was helping clear out his clothes. I took it home because I felt like, someday, someone would need to see the truth. I removed the rubber bands carefully and lifted the lid. Inside lay a meticulous, heartbreaking archive of corporate extortion. There were 81 individual HOA violation notices spanning from 2018 up until 3 months before Arthur's death. Every single notice was neatly folded, and stapled to the back of each one was Uncle Arthur's bank money order receipt. He had paid every single penny. I sat at Martha's table and began sorting them by year. The fines ranged from $50 for an unapproved trash can placement to a staggering $400 for repeated non-compliance. I pulled out my calculator and began adding up the receipts. When the final number flashed on the screen, my hands began to shake with pure rage. Over a 6-year period, the Silver Creek Estates HOA had extracted exactly $14,350 from an 80-year-old man living entirely on a fixed Social Security income. But the absolute worst part: more than half of those 81 violations were issued for unauthorized maintenance or illegal storage on the Western Strip itself. They had literally fined an old man thousands of dollars for standing on, walking through, and enjoying his own legally owned ancestral property, knowing an elderly senior citizen spent their final years on a fixed income writing checks to bullies just for peace. It breaks your heart. If you had a relative like Uncle Arthur going through this quietly, what would you tell them? Let me know in the comments. I immediately scanned every single receipt and sent them directly to Amanda Ross. Her response was immediate and chilling. "Tom, this completely changes our legal landscape," Amanda said, her voice dropping into a deadly serious register. "If the HOA board knowingly and repeatedly issued monetary fines to a resident for using land they knew they did not legally own, that transitions from a standard property boundary dispute into civil fraud, extortion, and corporate racketeering. This gives our lawsuit real teeth." Amanda filed our formal quiet title action in the county circuit court the following morning. By Thursday afternoon, a professional process server had personally served every single member of the HOA board of directors at their homes. Our lawsuit didn't just ask for a declaration of property ownership. Amanda had masterfully attached a sweeping counterclaim for the return of the $14,350, with maximum statutory interest, along with a formal judicial motion compelling the HOA to open up their entire financial accounting ledger to an independent forensic audit going back 20 years. If the board had been utilizing thousands of dollars of community dues collected from the 142 families in the subdivision to construct fences and pay commercial landscapers to maintain private land. They were guilty of a massive misappropriation of corporate funds. Victoria Sterling didn't take the lawsuit lying down. When people like her realize their power is slipping away, they don't retreat gracefully. They weaponize public opinion. 2 weeks after being served, a brightly colored flyer, printed on official HOA letterhead, appeared inside every single mailbox in Silver Creek Estates. I found mine on a rainy Tuesday morning. The bold headline read, "Critical Community Notice. Ultimate Threat to Your Property Values." The letter was a masterclass in manipulation. It claimed that a hostile, aggressive new property owner was currently launching a predatory lawsuit against the association, attempting to strip the neighborhood of its beloved historic green space. It warned every resident that the legal costs to defend the community would likely result in a mandatory special assessment fee of $1,500 per hour household, forced upon every family because of one man's greed. It completely omitted the fact that the land belonged to my deed. It failed to mention the 81 illegal fines sent to an old man, or the fact that Victoria had ordered a fence built on a disputed title. It was a desperate attempt to turn my neighbors into an angry mob. "It's working on some of them," Tom, Martha, told me later that afternoon, showing me her smartphone. On the private Silver Creek community Facebook page, a prominent resident named Gregory had shared a picture of the flyer, writing, "Who is this Thomas Vance guy? This is exactly the kind of selfish outsider who destroys a beautiful neighborhood. We need to stand with the board." The post already had dozens of angry comments. I forwarded the flyer to Amanda Ross. The silence on her end of the line lasted for a long, ominous moment. She actually distributed this to the entire community during active, open litigation. Amanda asked, sounding almost thrilled. "Every single house," I confirmed. "Victoria Sterling just crossed a dangerous line," Amanda said coldly, "by distributing a deliberately misleading document to potential witnesses and utilizing corporate HOA funds to intentionally defame a plaintiff in an active lawsuit. She has opened herself up to a massive personal defamation claim. I'm making a formal call this afternoon to the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. They have a specialized task force that investigates HOA governance fraud." 3 weeks later, the entire dynamic of the battle shifted. The State Attorney General's office officially opened a formal investigation into the Silver Creek Estates HOA Board for financial mismanagement and civil rights violations. They issued a sweeping administrative subpoena, demanding 30 years of bank statements, ledger entries, and internal board meeting minutes. The HOA had 30 days to comply. They turned over the files in 22. When Amanda received the copies of the internal board minutes, she called me into her office immediately. She slid a highlighted page across the table. It was an official transcript from a closed-door HOA board meeting dated the 14th of October, 2009. There, in black and white, was a recorded discussion about my uncle's property. The board's corporate attorney at the time had explicitly warned Victoria Sterling that the 42-foot western strip was still legally tied to Arthur Vance's 1971 deed. The minutes revealed that Victoria had personally led a vote to bury the report. The recorded reason: pursuing a formal legal title transfer would alert the property owner to the boundary discrepancy and create unnecessary, costly complications for the association. They knew. They had known since at least 2009 that the land wasn't theirs. Yet, for over a decade, Victoria had stood on that dirt, signed violation notices, and stolen thousands of dollars from an old man, fully aware that she was committing fraud. Discovering that your own monthly hard-earned money was being illegally weaponized by a rogue board president changes everything. How would you handle finding out your HOA was mismanaging tens of thousands of community dollars? Share your thoughts below. The bombshell news broke on a Wednesday morning on the front page of the regional newspaper. The investigative reporter, Sarah Jenkins, had obtained copies of the state investigation documents. The headline was devastating. Suburban HOA President under state fraud investigation for extortion and land grab. The article detailed the 2009 meeting minutes. The $14,350 extracted from Arthur Vance, and the $68,000 neighborhood dues that had been illegally spent over 15 years to maintain private property. By noon, the neighborhood's online groups exploded. The anger that had been directed at me completely reversed, turning into absolute fury directed at Victoria Sterling. Gregory, the man who had previously defended the board, posted a lengthy public apology to me, demanding the immediate resignation of the entire leadership team. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, the HOA's Corporate Defense Counsel called Amanda Ross, begging for an immediate, comprehensive civil settlement. They didn't want this case anywhere near a jury. The final settlement agreement was a total, unconditional surrender. The HOA formally executed a total quiet title deed transfer, recognizing my absolute ownership of the 42-foot western strip. The association was forced to pay my estate exactly $14,350 plus statutory interest, totaling $22,000. A mandatory $25,000 restitution fund was established by the association to reimburse other former residents who had been improperly fined over the years. The 6-foot wooden privacy fence was ordered to be completely dismantled and removed at the HOA's sole financial expense within 14 days under a strict penalty clause of $200 per Dalton Yai for every day they missed the deadline. Victoria Sterling was required to sign a mandatory, legally binding resignation, permanently banning her from ever serving on any property board in the state. 11 days later, a crew of workmen arrived to tear down the fence. I stood on my back porch with a hot cup of coffee, watching every single wooden panel get loaded onto a flatbed trailer. When the last post was pulled from the dirt, the worker filled the empty hole with rich topsoil and tamped it down with his boot. The barrier was gone. The land was wide open again. I walked down the length of the western strip, feeling the soft grass under my feet and looking up at the ancient white oak trees. The afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows across the ground that had finally returned to my family. Uncle Arthur had lived here for over 50 years. He had endured the harassment in silence, but his land had waited for someone to stand up for it. The story of Victoria Sterling's regime was featured on the popular true crime documentary channel, HOA Stories Uncovered, exposing her tactics to millions of viewers worldwide. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today to hear this incredible journey of justice and resilience. It takes a tremendous amount of courage to stand up to powerful organizations that believe they are completely above the law. But stories like Tom, Uncle Arthur's remind us all that the truth is always worth fighting for. If this story resonated with you, if it made you angry for Arthur but triumphant for Tom, please take a brief moment to hit that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts below, and subscribe to my channel, HOA Stories Uncovered. Sharing this video helps ensure that ordinary homeowners everywhere know their legal rights and possess the strength to stand tall against bullying. Let me know your overall thoughts on how this case unfolded, and until next time, stay vigilant, stay strong, and always read your deed.